a series of measures following our careful consideration of the report by UBC's fact-finding panel charged with looking into the Commerce Undergraduate Society Frosh chant. But before I go into that, I want to make a few preliminary points. First, I know that I speak for all of my colleagues here at the university and the vast majority of the UBC community when I say that I am extremely sorry that our first-year students at the Sauder School were subjected to this completely inappropriate Frosh activity. I'm determined that our Welcome Week activities in the future will make all students feel respected, safe, and engaged with the university. I am not sorry, however, that this has come to light. I think that we are given an opportunity now to seize this moment, to strike at the casual indifference to sexual violence and intolerance which still marks pockets in our society. It's important to remember that the CUS organized these events and that it has taken responsibility for what happened. But the university also recognizes its responsibility to provide oversight and an environment that allows for inclusive, respectful, and safe campus events, organized by students or by the university. We take that responsibility seriously, and all of the measures that we announced today are directed to ensuring that we put that in place. Vice President Cowin is now going to outline the report of the fact-finding panel, what they discovered.
Dean Helsley and I appointed 4 senior staff from our offices to look into the CUS Frosh events, focusing on the use of the Young Chant. Between Tuesday, September the 10th and Friday, September the 13th, the team interviewed 62 students and 4 staff, including CUS board members, CUS executive members of the CUS Frosh executive team, Frosh student leaders, and first-year students who participated in the CUS Frosh. The team also reviewed relevant documents. The report they have submitted to us, and which we are making public today, shows us clearly the following. At the CUS Frosh planning meetings held from February to August, the Sauder School's expectations were clearly communicated to the CUS. That is, Frosh events must be safe and include a respectful environment. We have no evidence that CUS leaders instructed Frosh leaders to use the chant during 2013 Frosh events. However, the report determined that this and other offensive chants were indeed a CUS oral tradition, that no CUS leader intervened to stop anyone initiating the chant this year, and that the vast majority of first-year students attending CUS Frosh events would have been exposed to the chant. After serious consideration of these findings, we determined that the CUS leadership and all the Frosh leaders be held accountable for what took place, and that they make tangible amends. At the same time, the whole of UBC needs to think and embark upon a deeper transformative and lasting process for change. Robert will outline the measures we are taking based on these findings.
President Toope, Vice President Cowin, and I feel that these measures must address 3 broad objectives: holding accountable the student leaders who were involved in this year's CUS Frosh events, beginning the process of restoring community trust and introducing new educational activities and opportunities for dialogue to promote cultural change at the Sauder School of Business and across UBC. Let me spell these measures out briefly. Relative to the objective of responsibility and accountability, 4 CUS leaders have resigned: the CUS president, the CUS vice president for engagement, and the 2 members of the CUS leadership who were responsible for organizing their Frosh activities this year. All Frosh leaders and the leadership of the CUS will participate in community service. The Sauder School of Business and the CUS will implement structural and organizational changes to ensure student well-being and inclusivity are part of all future CUS events. Relative to the objective of restoring community trust, the CUS will issue a public apology and detail the steps they will take to promote a positive, inclusive environment at Sauder and UBC. The CUS pledges to make a voluntary contribution of $250,000 over 3 years to fund professional counseling, support services, and education at UBC, focusing on the prevention of sexual violence. The CUS leaders will participate in anti-violence training provided by the AMS and its Sexual Assault Support Center. Finally, relative to the objective of introducing new educational activities and promoting cultural change, the Sauder School of Business is developing changes to the curriculum and engaging students to promote leadership, to provide leadership in promoting safe, inclusive, and respectful environments for students in all of its activities. Sauder will introduce new broad-based leadership training programs for students. And as previously announced, Sauder will no longer support CUS Frosh, although we will work with the CUS to ensure that appropriate Welcome Week activities are made available to students. Stephen, I believe you have a few more points to make.
In addition to the measures that we're announcing immediately, we all believe that the university has an obligation to address the more pernicious systemic aspects of the casual acceptance of violence and sexualization that seems to pop up in our society in incidents such as this CUS Frosh rape chant. I've therefore charged Vice President Cowin to lead a special task force which will report back early next year. The task force will marshal UBC's best thinking, national and international best practices, and our resources to outline broader actions to support the kind of transformative, robust change that we do believe is necessary on university campuses, including our own. I have one specific additional point that I would like to make, and that is that we learned through the media yesterday that some CUS Frosh participants were heard chanting about Aboriginal issues in a manner that was derogatory and dismissive of First Nations people. This is, of course, completely unacceptable. We're going to be looking into those reports, and we'll look into any other evidence of unbecoming conduct that is brought to us. Clearly, the measures announced today are intended to address these kind of situations as well, because they're about responsibility, about the understanding of our role in society, and about how individuals treat others. And that goes for sexualized violence and all other forms of intolerance. If more is needed, then more steps will be taken. I want to be very clear about one thing. The measures that we're taking today will not, of course, reverse the strong cultural forces and trends at work in our wider society. But we do believe that we can engage much more actively as a whole community here at UBC on these issues and to start making a difference for UBC and our society from right here. Thank you very much.
So this was our statement. Of course, we're opening the floor now for questions. I would ask that when you ask questions, if you'd like to direct them to anyone in particular, of course, please do so. If you wouldn't mind giving us your name and your media affiliation, that would be lovely. And of course, we have to wrap up promptly at 10:30, and perhaps we'll be able to wrap up earlier. It's up to you. I would like to hand the first question over to the Ubyssey reporters, who, of course, broke the story. Arno, maybe you have a question?
Thank you. Arno Roosevelt from the Ubyssey. Our understanding is that 4 years ago, this chair was left up on a board, and a dean from a different faculty made the Dean of Sauder at the time, aware of the cheer. Following that, there was one clean year of Frosh, and then it went back to this cheer. You're talking a lot about the cultural changes that are needed. Can you talk about why those cultural changes weren't something that the university felt like needed to be made at that time?
Well, I'll begin. As I understand it, it was not, in fact, this cheer that was found on a whiteboard 4 years ago, but another offensive cheer. And at the time, Sauder did take direct action on issues related to inappropriate conduct. And I'll let Dean Helsley answer further.
Yes, it is my understanding as well that the cheer that was left on a whiteboard a few years ago, in 2008 specifically, was not in fact this cheer. It was, however, troublesome to the people who found it, and it was brought forward to the school for its attention. This led to further and intensive consultations between the CUS and the Sauder School about appropriate conduct at Frosh and about the school's expectations of the events. And ultimately, that led to the creation of actually a contract that all CUS Frosh leaders sign, which details the activities that they will undertake and the objectives of ensuring that appropriate conduct is followed at all times.
I'll only add that obviously it wasn't enough, and that's why we're taking the measures that we're taking today.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm Tracy Sherlock from the Vancouver Sun. I was just wondering if you could give more details of what the $250,000 would be used for.
Yes. The CUS contribution will be used to hire a trained professional who will work in counseling and education-related activities pertinent to the problem of sexual violence on campus. The Sauder School of Business will also provide funding for this position to ensure that we have enough resources to get a full-time person in this role. And I think it's really important to note that this will extend over at least 3 years. Our intention, of course, is to continue this kind of support in the future. But I think it's very important that the CUS contribution is focused on a time horizon which will allow us to begin to address some of the systemic issues that have come up through these events.
Jeff Hastings, Golden News. Can you please address the allegations of the racist chant? What is known, what is suspected, what's been reported? And today, there's no class because of reconciliation. Does this tarnish that?
Well, it's certainly ironic, and it's not something I would have wished for, that on the very day that I'm going to be speaking to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and expressing the deep concern of the university for all of our collective parts in that history, that this should come to light. Clearly not something I would have wanted. We don't know a lot about it yet, so we're trying to investigate as quickly as we can. We don't know whether this was an endemic, as it appears that the rape chant was, whether it was a one-off. We're still investigating. We're talking to as many people as we can, and as soon as we know more, we will obviously act with the due seriousness that this requires.
Thank you. And have these investigations been limited to commerce? Have other faculties been looked at for this type of behavior?
No, we've tried to focus so far, just because we knew we had to respond quickly, we tried to focus first on where we could get as much information, which was in relation to the commerce activities. But I think you'll see in the response of the university, which is university-wide, and indeed not Vancouver alone, but the same measures and approaches will be adopted in our Kelowna campus in the Okanagan. We're treating this as if it is not a problem limited to Sauder, and as if we must address these concerns from the perspective of the whole university. We may discover that there are other examples in other faculties, and that's why we're trying to be active about this and not to assume that this is entirely related to only one faculty.
Yeah.
C'est Toope, c'est vrai, Fouchard de RDI. Peut-être nous dire à quel point l'image de l'université a été ternie par ça, puis les mesures que vous annoncez aujourd'hui, est-ce que c'est suffisant?
Évidemment, il y a un risque dans le domaine de l'image, mais je pense que nous avons à tenter d'utiliser des options sérieuses. Nous avons pris des mesures très efficaces, je pense, pour adresser cette situation. Et pour cette raison, je pense que probablement, dans le long terme, il n'y a pas un risque de réputation très sévère.
So, President Toope, you might want to respond to this question in English. The question had to do with, has this affected UBC's reputation? Are we concerned about this?
And of course, my answer is that I think in the long term it will not, because we're trying to address the issues with great seriousness. I'll add that, as I suggested, I believe that these are deep cultural and social phenomenon that are far beyond the walls of any university. And I hope people will understand that we are trying to do our very best to address them in the way that a university can, through serious discussion, through education, and we hope individual transformation. That's what universities are about.
From CTV.
John Woodward from CTV. You mentioned that this was a tradition in CUS. I wondered, did the investigation find out how far back the tradition went, or where the chant came from originally?
I'll just begin and then turn it over to Vice President Cowin. I don't think we really know exactly how far back this goes. What we did learn is that the chant is apparently used in other universities and in high schools in various parts of Canada.
I think nothing further to add. I think that's what the fact-finding team heard from those with whom they spoke.
So can you elaborate on that, about which schools were?
We don't know.
I mean,
CKNW?
I heard at some point it was a rugby chant. Did that come up?
No.
No.
CKNW?
I apologize for getting here late, but I just wanted to ask, what are you doing to ensure that nothing like this happens again?
And your name, please?
Marcella?
Well, I think I have to be direct and say I can't assure that it will never happen again. We do not have complete control over all of the decision-making processes of 50,000 students. What I think we can do is try to treat this with the seriousness it deserves, to engage in the three-pronged approach that we've laid out, which is to say personal accountability for the leaders involved, but also very strong programs to try to change the culture that allows these kinds of chants to be seen as acceptable, and then finally some retribution, some remediation into the community. So we're trying to take that three-pronged strategy, and I hope that it will be effective over the medium and longer term.
If I might just add a few comments, I think, frankly, the thing that we can do immediately to ensure that this doesn't happen again is to end our support for Frosh. We are going to redesign Welcome Week activities so that they meet our standards going forward. And I also think it's very important to engage with the students. I've had the opportunity to reach out to all of our first-year students, and one of the things that I asked them to do was to take ownership of the culture in the school and to engage in a dialogue to ensure that we can live up to the values that we claim to hold.
I'd like to add one point, if I may, that I really don't believe that what happened represents the ethos of our student body. I think these things happen in strange ways. Attempts are made to develop a sense of camaraderie, however misplaced. And we're operating in a society where casual sexualization and acceptance of violence is very much a part of the popular culture. Students are part of that, and so we have to address it. But in their hearts, I actually don't believe this is what most of our students think or believe. And so I actually have been, in some senses, reaffirmed in the response of our students to these events. I haven't heard a single student defend what happened. In fact, when we talk to our students, and we all have, the response is one of upsetment and frankly shame and not wanting to be associated with this. That actually makes me very proud of the vast majority of our student body.
Question at the back.
Jason Harden with CBC. We're talking about calling out students in sort of the School of Business. I mean, these are tomorrow's business leaders going into fields where very often experiences of sexual harassment, inequality for women, that kind of thing exists. You said this is an endemic kind of tradition. I was wondering, to what degree do you think these attitudes that students have here go into the workplace? Because it does exist. And everybody says they don't want to be part of it, but
Robert?
What I would say is that this highlights for me the great importance that we should and do place upon issues related to ethics and respect in the business school. And you're absolutely right. When I've had the chance recently to reach out to members of the community, to leaders in the business community about these issues, they have highlighted for me again, just how important it is that we try to help our students gain an appropriate set of values that they can take forward into their professional lives. And I agree with you completely. This is a very, very important issue for us. There's a lot of work to be done, but it is extremely important that we be successful in this regard.
Question here at the front.
Thank you for your comments. According to the investigation, was the majority heard about this change, and then nobody actually gave feedback to the this school? What do you think? Is it cause some consulting?
I think my response would be, it seems from what we learned in the report that the secrecy of this was very much a part of what made it a generator of camaraderie. So the theory was, we're being transgressive, we're on a bus, we're closeted, and we're not going to tell anybody what happens. So yes, it causes me concern, but I must say that it's not the first and probably won't be the last time that people choose to try to keep something secret from authorities in society.
Jeff at the back.
Jeff, Ubyssey. You've said the CUS pledges to make a voluntary contribution of $250,000. The CUS executive or the board of directors can't make that pledge according to its constitution. Do you plan on holding a referendum of the student body so that they can decide? Because the CUS constitution demands spending decision over $50,000.
Yeah, there are some procedural issues that the CUS will have to manage in order to live up to their pledge. One possibility is a referendum. Another possibility is just to refer the spending to a subsequent board who is able to make expenditures up to $100,000 when they are so budgeted. And I think they're currently trying to figure out exactly the mechanism that they would follow to live up to the pledge.
But to be clear, there is $50,000 that has been committed, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
$50,000 each year for 5 years?
No, it was intended. It's $50,000 this year because we are halfway through the fiscal year, and we would hire the person for the balance of this year, and then $100,000 for each of the next two.
Yeah.
Has there been any communication with St. Mary's University since you're dealing with similar issues?
Only indirectly, in that we certainly tried to learn from the experience. We have not spoken directly, but we obviously know what St. Mary's chose to do as a result of the actions that took place there, and we've looked at that very carefully.
Collègue de RDI.
Peut-être revenir sur les allégations de chant autochtone, peut-être nous parler justement de la situation, surtout aujourd'hui avec la commission de réconciliation de vérité.
Évidemment, ce n'est pas une situation que je voudrais avoir dans mon position, mais pour moi, il reste important de clarifier qu'il n'y a pas un lien entre les deux situations. Dans la commission aujourd'hui, j'offrirai un discours au sujet de l'histoire et dans nos investigations maintenant, nous cherchons la vérité et nous adresserons toutes les allégations si nous avons l'information. I just said that we're treating the situation with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission obviously separately from the situation of any chant that may have taken place that was derogatory to Aboriginal peoples. Not what I would have wanted, as I said earlier, but we are going to investigate thoroughly, and as soon as we know more, we will take action. But meanwhile, I will continue to work, as we all want to, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the historical issues.
Mark?
Yeah, Mark now. President Toope, it's obvious this problem goes far beyond UBC. Have you given any thought to engaging other universities that are talking to governments about a much broader?
Yes, and I think given that we've now had incidents at St. Mary's and here, and from what we've heard, that this chant may actually have been used at other universities and high schools in Canada, I do think there's an opportunity. I currently serve as the chair of the board of the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, and I do intend to bring the issue to the association and to begin to ask whether or not we can take a more national approach.
Sure.
Are there any formal disciplinary proceedings against any of these students, any of the Frosh leaders, CUS students, anything on people's academic records, for example?
I'll begin, and then I can turn it over to Vice President Cowin. What we've done is that we have decided, given the historic situation that appears to be a systemic issue, given that there are now more than 80 people directly involved, the Frosh leaders and CUS leaders, what we've done is we've discussed with them how we can best create that sense of individual responsibility. Instead of going through the disciplinary process, what we're doing is we have an agreement that there will be very serious community service. Indeed, that's one of the disciplinary items that could have been imposed through that process. So in a sense, what we've done is expedited the whole situation. Rather than having to have hearings on 80 or 81 different people, we've agreed, and there's been an acceptance of responsibility, and there will be an imposition of individual responsibility, but we're not going to have to go through the disciplinary process. Do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think that the UBC Student Code of Conduct, the kind of disciplinary or remedial measures that could be imposed through that include those measures that have been taken here in terms of apology, in terms of monetary restitution, and in terms of also voluntary public service. So those are very much in keeping with measures within the code. And as President Toope said, that what we have done is expedited those outcomes through the process that we have taken.
At the back, yes.
So with this penalty of $250,000 for 3 years, how can we measure the outcome that it is really effective or just short-lived penalty?
First of all, I would rather it not be referred to as a penalty. I don't really think that's accurate. I think it's a voluntary contribution on the part of the CUS to acknowledge their responsibility in this matter. We intend to devote the resources, again, to providing capacity at the university in counseling and educational activities that will help us come to terms with the problem of sexual violence on campus. And you're right, it's a very big problem. It's a very big issue, and it's probably hard to directly measure success in this regard. But we certainly are looking for the universities and the Sauder schools' attitudes and values as it relates to these issues to change markedly over the next few years.
And I would only add that the task force, which Vice President Cowin is going to chair, will have the opportunity to take a look at how we might create measures for success and what the next steps will be. This is only the preliminary response.
All right, I think Jeff has a question at the back there.
Yeah, so you mentioned these are voluntary measures by the CUS, but our sources inside the CUS say that very few of these measures, including the resignation of the executive, were truly voluntary. That there was significant pressure from the university, from Sauder's dean, Sauder, obviously. How many of these measures were truly volunteered by the CUS or the AMS, which is its actual overseeing body, and how many of these came from the external pressure from the university?
Well, I certainly did meet with the leadership of the CUS on several occasions, both last week and I guess just yesterday. They did indicate that some of the measures that we are announcing today are, but I did articulate to them what I thought they could do to begin the process of restoring their credibility in the community and restoring their authenticity to serve as the leadership of the Sauder School.
I believe, yeah, CTV.
So I believe you said 2 executives have resigned and 2 other Commerce undergraduates decided people responsible for Frosh have resigned. So who's left on the board now making those decisions about donation? And are they going to be elections or by-elections to fill those vacancies?
There will be elections to fill those vacancies, and my understanding is the CUS is now engaged in internal discussions about how they might like to change their own constitution or their own bylaws in response to these events. The decision-making body is the board of directors of the CUS at this point, and that's been the case all along.
Jason.
To follow up on his question, you say you articulated that this would be a good idea. What was kind of the stick behind that in terms of what would happen if they didn't voluntarily do these things?
I think I can begin to answer that by saying there was really no stick. It was a conversation that the Dean had with the Commerce Undergraduate Society, where the Dean was extremely clear in articulating the university's deep concern and in making suggestions about what might be appropriate as means of accountability and taking responsibility. It may very well be that people feel that they are frustrated by having to do that, but I think that's very much a part of what we believe was necessary in addressing this very, very serious set of allegations.
At the back.
The report.
Who are you, sorry, in your meeting?
Sorry, 24 Hours Vancouver, Michael Neely. The report only mentioned that the chance is a very small component of Frosh activities. One of the only other specifics it points out was that there was also drinking, underage drinking, sometimes in excess. What other specifics have you found of what happens at Frosh? Specifics.
Louise?
So these allegations these statements only came forward on the latter part of the conversation that the fact-finding team had with the students with whom they spoke. And so what we have been left with now is knowledge that these things took place. The report really isolates its findings to the chant episode, and what we will be doing moving forward is now to be looking further into the matters that also came to our attention through the conversations that students had with the fact-finding team.
So specifically, what were some of those matters that perhaps weren't elaborated on in the report?
So, as mentioned, underage drinking that was mentioned in the report, and also sexualized behavior or activities that also took place during the Frosh events.
They also mentioned there were some positives. What are exactly, specifically, positive orientation events?
Well, I would say that the fact-finding team, and as is signaled in the report, that the Frosh leaders felt that their own experience of having gone through Frosh as a first-year student themselves compelled them into this leadership opportunity as a more senior student. So I would say that there were many positive attributes of Frosh that carried those students forward to return as being Frosh leaders. I think that the fact-finding was really about one component part of the entire experience. And I think that we have to also think about that in relation to the whole experience, and that these chants on the buses were isolated and they took place in small parts of time over a 3-day period. So certainly, as I think Dean Helsley can speak to, the kind of activities in which the students were engaged in all other aspects of orientation were intended to be about creating a sense of affiliation with Sauder and a sense of place at UBC.
So I'm sensing, all right, question in the back, yeah?
Laura from CBC. I'm just wondering, the $250,000 that's being set aside for this position, is that going to take into effect immediately? Like, is that position being completed, like, as in this year, or is that something that's going to happen over 3 years? I'm just wondering what kind of support is happening right now.
It would be created this year, as quickly as we can, as quickly as we can get the initiative organized.
You mentioned sexualized activities, and I just wondered what exactly you mean by that, as you were discovering.
I'll only say that the report does not go into any detail around that, but I think we're talking about, from what we hints that we have, sort of semi-nudity, people being asked to strip, that kind of activity, which again is unacceptable and not appropriate. But wouldn't be the first time it had happened at a university.
Are you embarrassed?
Yes, I am embarrassed. This has been deeply, deeply troubling for me as dean of the school. And as I've said many times, it's completely inconsistent with our values as an institution, and it's also completely inconsistent with what I know about our student body.
Arno.
This is for Dean Helsley. So the Commerce Undergraduate Society has one of the highest student fees at the university. And in fact, not too long ago, your office discouraged the CUS from lowering that fee. Now you say that one of the recommendations from you to CUS leadership was that they set aside $250,000 of their student fees toward this. But Frosh is something that doesn't include all CUS members. A lot of people transfer in and don't participate in Frosh, and a lot of people just don't do Frosh. So what do you say to all of the students who had nothing to do with this and now are seeing their student fees going to something that they were not associated with?
What the fact-finding report shows is that this event has been occurring over a number of years. And so I don't think it's inappropriate for the student government of the school as a whole to contribute, because I believe that students from more than just this year's Frosh have some responsibility in this event.
Jason, you had a question.
How will that position fit into sort of the existing resources that you have in dealing with sexual abuse, these kinds of issues?
We haven't really spoken structurally about where that position will fit, but given the kind of expertise that we are looking for, we think that the person is likely going to be a registered psychologist or a registered social worker. So it might be, again unconfirmed, that the best place would be within UBC counselling services, but we really haven't discussed the structure fully.
But what kind of budget do you already have in place? Like what portion of that is
Well,
and how has that budget changed over the years?
So UBC Counselling Services employs a number of counsellors. This person would add into that complement. Also, the AMS has a sexual assault support centre. And the university is also committing to add in additional diversity educator into the mix of current resources that currently exist. And also a new position, a student liaison, to work with our student governments as well.
Do you have a figure though, like budgetary, so 250?
Jason, we can get back to you with a figure later, okay?
It's quite distributed across many units in the university, which is why it's not so easy to give you a direct answer, but we'll find it for you.
And just to be clear, Vice President Cowin mentioned 2 new positions at the end. These are 2 new positions funded by the university, and this is a commitment now. So this is new. Yep.
Another budget question. How big a contribution is $250,000 to the Commerce Undergraduate Society? How big is their budget? What proportion of the money is
Their annual revenues are approximately $1.3 million a year.
Is that mostly student fees? Or?
It's entirely student fees.
At the back, yeah.
Evolution 1079 at BCIT. Question about the alcohol focus in a lot of Frosh events. I know it mentions that underage first years were drinking some food sets, etc. But I think it's common knowledge that across Canada, alcohol is a huge focus in Frosh events. So if the Sauder school is no longer going to support CUS Frosh, and I'm sure that's making UBC as a whole reflect, what are your thoughts on trying to take alcohol out or trying to address the issue of excessive alcohol consumption, often like whether underage or people who may not have a habit of drinking yet?
I think it's an issue of great concern. In fact, as you know, probably, there have been many incidents across Canada, and some real leadership has been taken by Queen's University and Acadia University, who've tried to develop a coalition across the country to address questions of excessive drinking, not only in Frosh activities, but in undergraduate programs generally. We're part of that process. We've expressed great support for what's going on, and I think that this will give a further impetus to reflect on how the Frosh events are organized across the university, not just in Sauder. And I think we do have a responsibility as a society and, of course, as a university to address questions of excessive alcohol consumption, which, in many circumstances across the country has led to death. This is really quite serious.
All right, Arno, maybe last question. I don't If anybody has further questions after Arno, let me know, because I sense that we're coming to an end here. Arno.
This is also for Dean Helsley. Given that you mentioned that this is a systemic issue, it's something that's been going on for a long time, can you speak to whether it was really fair to ask Enzo and Jillian to resign, and also can you speak to how their resignation will help the process moving forward if the people replacing them are people who wouldn't have allowed this to go on? Can you speak to that?
I think it was essential for the CUS leadership to take responsibility for this event. I see that as a critical part of beginning the process of restoring their credibility as an organization.
Do they bear more responsibility, this year's exec bear more responsibility than the previous 10 years, 15 years of leadership?
The events came to light this year, so in some sense, just by default, they are going to bear more responsibility.
All right, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. If you have any further questions, of course, Randy or myself will be pleased to pass on other information to you. And have a good day.
Thank you.